Coming up on Network Africa. South African officials say death toll from floods in Durban has risen to more than 250. 10 killed in Egypt's tourist bus crash. Plus, Ghana's inflation rate rises to highest in a decade. Hello and a warm welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. We begin in South Africa, where the death toll from the floods that have devastated the coastal region around the port city of Durban has risen to more than 250. Many people are still missing. Local authorities are calling for a state of disaster to be declared after some areas saw months' worth of rainfall in one day. Officials have called it one of the worst weather storms in the history of the country. President Cyril Ramaphosa has visited the area and has pledged to help. Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, joins us now for more. Betty, just earlier today, authorities estimated that 59 people had died, and now we're hearing reports of 250 people. That's a huge rise, and many people are still missing.
Yes, many are still missing. One of the provincial officials just recently confirmed that we have 253 people dead, confirmed dead, and still counting. A lot of people are still missing. Here and there you have reports coming in, people who have failed to return home from work overnight. And then, because today the rain has gone down a bit, and the South Africa Weather Service is warning that we may still have a little more rain in a few days' time. This is Easter weekend, where there is a lot of travel, so people are still reconsidering. We don't know how that will work out. But a lot of people are still missing, and the president, who has been going through some of the affected communities, we understand 10 districts in KwaZulu-Natal were affected this time. We were in this kind of situation, probably not to this extent in 2019 and some other years after, before then, because I was listening to a climate expert saying in 1987 you had over 300 people killed in this kind of disaster where you had a lot of rain. So hopefully the fatality wouldn't be much more than this, but people are still reporting people missing and hoping for the best.
Amid the president's visit, local authorities are calling for a state of disaster to be declared. Has the president said anything relating to this?
Yes. While he was in one of the communities, the president said that, speaking with the media, he said that what he called a state of a provincial area of disaster has been declared for that province in order to free the resources to help them. It doesn't have to. The implication is that it doesn't have to go through. The government doesn't have to go through all the longer process of freeing funds, for example, to help them rebuild, to support the communities. Other provinces as well have said that they will be helping. They're calling in the army as well to support help, probably in search and rescue, or to secure some of the areas that are yet to be washed off by the rains. So what you have now is provincial area of disaster, which is just limited to that province. And there's a string of things that the president says will happen. First, assessment is still to be done, the proper assessment with all the relevant experts to look at the extent of damage so that government will know what to do in helping people to rebuild. But to give you a picture, the place, KwaZulu-Natal is healing like strings of heels. and people have houses built, on slopes and up the hills as well. And the amount of rain that happened within these few days, it affected Gauteng as well, but probably not to the extent of KwaZulu-Natal. I was speaking to a Nigerian in Durban who said that an embankment collapsed close to his place. His place wasn't exactly affected, but because of the embankment that collapsed in the heavy rains, the debris was washed towards his own property. And the damage wasn't that much, but he will be fixing a number of things.
And we know that some services like communication and electricity were heavily disrupted yesterday. What's the situation on ground now? Are they back up and running?
They can't totally be back up and running. If you've been looking at the pictures, they can't. But I know that Eskom, which is the power utility company, has been running level two, load shedding all over the country. But Eskom has announced that the boss of Eskom, Andre de Ruyter, has announced that they will be holding off that in the affected communities. At least that will reduce, what they have to deal with at this point, that it will be held off for that. But the utility company is struggling.
The extreme weather comes as scientists warn that climate change is fueling heavier rainfall than usual in southern Africa. What measure is the South African government putting in place to ensure the safety of lives and property?
Well, a lot is being said that will be done. When the president was there this afternoon, he was talking about upping the efforts to handle the effects of climate change. He said climate change is here with us. And this just shows us that we have to do much more. There are experts calling for more, for example, in the issue of floods, to have more drainage infrastructure to help. But you can only do so much to face the fury of nature. Even the most advanced communities all over the world, even the U.S., we see what flooding does to some of the states, some of the communities there. But he said a lot more still needs to be done to ensure that the impact of this will be minimal, not to the extent that we have seen, this week. So hopefully we'll get to hear the details, probably after the experts that he's talking about have looked at what's to be done, not just for this province, because we often report impacts here and there in other provinces as well. But a lot is being said will be done. What will be done, we'll get to see.
All right then, Bessie, thank you so much for the update.
Thank you.
And moving on now, Nigeria's Chief of Naval Staff, Vice Admiral Awal Gambo, says it's important to have relevant structures in place to meaningfully engage the youths in the country and bring down the high number of maritime crime and criminals in the country. Speaking with Channels Television in Cape Town, South Africa, where he's currently on an official visit, he says security operatives are also among those complicit in these crimes, and the Navy is directing a lot of effort to curb the trend for the sake of the economy.
Security officials cut across the armed forces and, of course, other security agencies. Some of us are complicit. Beyond that, even some executives of the NNPC, the political elites, are all involved in this crime. But you see, the issue is that government and the political elites need to enlighten the youths, because illiteracy, poverty, bring about youths being cultivated to go into some of these criminalities. And so therefore government must ensure and deliberately deliver dividends of democracy to some of these riverine communities and even beyond in the hinterlands and all that, so that the youths will not be cultivated to go and commit these maritime crimes. Because the plan for piracy and sea robbery is on land. And so if you motivate the youth on the land with fruitful ventures, opportunities to have some artisan ability to be able to fend for him or herself, they will not be cultivated by criminal elements to go and partake in the illegal harvest of our common patrimony, which is the hydrocarbon, because the oil and gas industry takes care of 85% of our GDP, which is used for, the development and the economic prosperity of the country.
And over in North Africa, 10 people have died and 14 others have been injured in a traffic accident in Egypt involving a tourist bus. Reports say 5 Egyptians, 4 French people and 1 Belgian were killed in the crash in the Aswan region, said to have involved a collision with a lorry. Aswan is a tourism hub near the ancient Egyptian temples of Abu Simbel. And the VOA's Edward Yeranayan joins us now from Cairo for more. Ed, what more can you tell us about this accident at this time?
Well, Penny, judging by the pictures and the video, apparently the bus caught fire sometime after the accident. So one wonders if many of the passengers had received burns, which was not reported in the media. Of course, AFP, the French press agency, took video of the bus long after the accident, and clearly it caught fire sometime between the accident and when that video was taken. So it's not necessarily certain that it was burning when the passengers were still on the bus. But certainly if they were, they are probably more serious injuries than were being reported.
Yeah, and speaking of those injuries, we understand that 14 people were injured in the crash. Any news on their condition?
The Egyptian media is very reluctant to give out details about conditions. I mean, they reported that the governor of the province, as is usually the case, went to the hospital to check on the victims and to see that they were being cared for properly, as the media put it. I don't know that they really are allowed to release that kind of information unless the embassies, since these are foreigners, foreign nationals, allow that to be released. I've tried to find out in the past when there were American victims or Americans in the hospital as to what their conditions were, and they were not very forthcoming with the information. So I know that's not really likely to come out very, very soon. But I mean, as I said, if the bus was burning when the passengers were still on board, it's likely that some were more seriously injured than worth seeing.
And Ed, deadly traffic accidents claim thousands of lives every year in Egypt, which has a poor transport safety record. What's the cause of these crashes and collisions, and how is the government tackling this issue?
Well, Tenny, I think people here in many African countries, not just in Egypt, drive rather carelessly. I don't want to speak for Nigeria, since that's not my right to do. But here in Egypt, it's amazing to me when I go out on the road to see how careless some people are. And of course, since it's Ramadan and people are fasting, they're even more careless since their bodies are being stressed seriously. So it's not unlikely that there are going to be a lot of accidents during this month, the month of Ramadan, more so than usual. And Egypt, of course, has a pretty bad safety record anyway.
All right, then, VOA's Edward Yeranayan, thank you so much for the update.
My pleasure, Tenny.
And still to come on the program. United Nations warns that the threat of famine is real in Somalia, and South Sudan says urgent action is needed. Please stay with me. Thanks for staying with us. Over in West Africa, the rate of inflation in Ghana has risen to its highest level in almost a decade, with food prices increasing by around a fifth. The government says the inflation rate went up from more than 15% in February to 19.4% in March, far exceeding the central bank's target of between 6 and 10%. The bank raised interest rates last month in an effort to curb rampant price rises. The government has also announced a package of spending cuts to try to reduce its budget deficit and prop up the local currency. The United Nations agencies are warning that millions of people in Somalia could face famine, with children the most at risk. Somalia is currently facing what experts call its worst drought in a decade, with the country's largest river, the Juba, almost totally dried up.
There's a heads up that this assessment is showing that we are already identifying 6 areas in Somalia that are at risk of famine, that are at risk of going down that route of 2011 if we don't act now. There are dozens of camps for the internally displaced people, which have grown exponentially in the last few months. Thousands of households are pouring into them from the areas hardest hit by the drought. They're desperately seeking assistance, and when you visit some of these camps, you can see the lines of the new arrivals coming in, and many of these people are women and children, and frankly, it's impossible to see them and not be shocked by the visible signs of destitution and life-threatening malnutrition. The latest data shows how rapidly things are getting worse, with 6 million people now facing acute food insecurity in the coming months. This is almost double the number at the start of the year. It's almost 40% of the population, and there is a real risk of famine in some areas if the current rainy season fails.
Meanwhile, the United Nations says the situation is equally devastating in South Sudan, where about 7.74 million people in the country will likely face hunger between May and July of this year.
2/3 of the country will likely face hunger between May and July of this year. In terms of actual numbers, that means this is about 7.74 million people. This is the highest number ever recorded. Of the 7.74 million people, an estimated 87,000 people will face catastrophe. That is IPC phase 5. These are the level of acute food insecurity, which is normally characterized by extreme hunger in the face of very limited coping option. In South Sudan, 1.34 million children are malnourished severely, and over 600,000 pregnant and lactating women are malnourished this year from these results.
In response to the destruction caused by a blaze in Hargeisa in Somaliland, the United Nations has deployed an interagency team of technical experts to work with the government and the response committee to support the rebuilding of the marketplace. According to Somaliland's response committee established to lead the immediate relief efforts and planning for the market's reconstruction, preliminary estimates of the total cost of losses incurred from the fire range between $1.5 billion to $2 billion. In addition, the destruction of so many goods has led to scarcity and inflation in the region.
More than a week has passed since a blaze destroyed the Maiden Market in Hargeisa. The impact of the devastating fire is still being felt, with many local business people reeling from its impact.
My boutique used to stock clothes. I used to sell all types of clothes. I used to feed my elderly parents as well as my daughters. In total, 10 people's livelihoods depended on my business. I was the only breadwinner for my family, and they depended on this boutique.
With an estimated 5,000 businesses, ranging from large stores to small stalls, once located in the marketplace, Zainab is far from alone.
This business sustained many members of my family whose livelihoods directly depended on it. Today, as you can see, it's completely destroyed.
Located in central Hargeisa and spread out over 5 square kilometers, the Wahine Market was the largest market in Somaliland and the 4th largest in the Horn of Africa. It drew sellers and shoppers from the city and surrounding communities. Preliminary estimates of the total cost of losses incurred from the fire range between $1.5 billion to $2 billion. In response to the destruction, the United Nations deployed an interagency team of technical experts earlier this week to work with the government and the response committee to assess the damage and support the rebuilding of the marketplace.
The team has experts in environmental issues, legal issues, communication issues, and more importantly, socio-economic as well as health issues that will be working with the response committee that has been put up by the government of Somaliland to try and establish what areas need to be responded to.
Soon after arriving in Hargeisa, members of the team, along with representatives of other international partners such as the European Union, visited the location where they saw firsthand the extent of the damage and met business owners.
I do recall speaking to one of the women and just asking her what, the impact this has had on her. And she mentioned 2 critical things. One is that the heat that she has to bear because of the destruction of the shed where she was selling her wares is great. And she related this to the effect that it can have on their health as they work. The second thing that she talked about was the requirement for stocks to restock the losses that they have incurred. And she was talking about very limited resources that should turn around every year, but that is now destroyed. She doesn't have it anymore. So the site visit also helped us put a human face to the tragedy.
Somaliland's Chamber of Commerce, Industry and Agriculture estimates that the fire accounted for 40 to 50% of the city's economy. The UN interagency team worked this week with the authorities on assessing what is needed to rebuild better. Local residents provided a ray of hope that along with international support, solidarity and unity will help the marketplace return to its central role in the city. UN experts and local authorities will issue a joint assessment report. It will be used at a meeting of international donors taking place next week in Kenya. Somaliland declared independence from Somalia in 1991, but is not recognized as a state by the international community. Despite this, the region of 3 million people has maintained its own independent government, currency and security system.
And finally on the program, Libya has held a ceremony at the Museum of Libya in Tripoli to showcase 9 ancient artifacts that were returned by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Although recovering cultural artifacts can be extremely difficult, the director of the UN's Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute is proud of the Libyan authorities for their most efforts.
Libyan authorities have received 9 ancient artifacts, including stone heads, urns and pottery, that were returned by the United States after being smuggled out of the North African country. All the pieces had been illegally excavated and shipped to the United States, but they were identified by archaeologists working with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in New York and have been returned to the Museum of Libya in Tripoli. The pottery includes patterned jars. All the pieces are now in the museum located in the central Tripoli palace of King Idris, who was ousted in 1969 and which has been closed to the public since the 2011 uprising. Once a major province of the Roman Empire and home to spectacular coastal ruins, Libya has a wealth of archaeological sites and its museums boast an array of ancient treasure. However, during the years of chaos that have followed the 2011 NATO-backed uprising, some of its museums were looted and numerous sites were pillaged by treasure hunters digging in the ground. Director of the United Nations Interregional Crime and Justice Research Institute, Antonia Maria De Meo, says he appreciates the effort of the Libyan authorities.
We are very proud to work with the Libyan authorities for the return of these really important cultural antiquities today. The process to return cultural antiquities is incredibly complex. It requires massive partnership. In this case, there was a partnership with the U.S. authorities. The Manhattan DA's office was involved in a criminal investigation that uncovered these particular works. And then there was a cooperation on the U.S. side to the Libyan consulate in Washington, D.C. And we were involved behind the scenes, working also together with the the LARMO to coordinate this and also with the NGO to manage the transportation and delivery. As you can tell, there's many actors required, but when we work together for cooperation, we're able to actually achieve a success like today.
After major antiquities looting following the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in 2003 and in Syria during the war after its own 2011 uprising, militant groups raised money by trading in antiquities, drawing greater involvement from police.
And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Teniola Shibowale.